Okay, there we go. Okay. We were talking about attending last time and all of the things that you need to do to attend. You do need to pay attention to your client, of course. The question is, what kind of cultural imperative is there for you to attend? They may be intimidated by your intensity. So you have to be very careful. You have to read your clients. You have to try to determine what they want. And this is from the very beginning. And some of these things may change over time. They may be intimidated by you initially. One of the things we're going to talk about is the fact they don't really want to be there. Most people don't want to go to a counselor. Most people don't really enjoy it very much. They're embarrassed. They're insulted. They don't think they need to be there. So they really don't want to do it. So one of the things that you have to do is you have to be able to read what's going on as far as your client is concerned. And part of that has to do with attending. As you can see, this lady is leaning forward and she's very intense and looking at this other lady's eyes. Gender, of course, can make a difference as well. If I were her client and she was looking at me like this, I'd think, oh my God, she's in love with me. Oh my God, what am I going to do? So you have to be very careful. You've got to be aware of who your clients are and what their expectations are. And of course, we were talking about cultural imperatives. There are cultural differences between different select individuals. One part of the problem with the white community is that they don't recognize the fact that other people are different from them. They think everybody wants to be like them. And this is a mistake. So as natives, you shouldn't make that same mistake. The other thing that you need to think about is, sure, you're all Dene and you all understand your traditions, but how traditional are the people that you're dealing with? And this is a really interesting subject. I was talking to a lady last night. She has 7 children, and she was saying 2 of her children speak Navajo very well. 4 of her children understand Navajo, but they don't speak it. And then she has one child that doesn't want to have anything to do with it, nothing at all. She's goth, she wears skulls, she just doesn't want to deal with it, okay? She's one of those kind of people, really kind of interesting. So you've got to understand that despite the fact that this person may be from a group that you're very well aware of, they may not be traditional at all to the extent that they're rebelling against their own traditions. So you have to understand that as well. And the other thing is, of course, we talked about the Hopi last time. But what if you're dealing with somebody who's an Apache or somebody that's Ho-Chunk from Nebraska? You know, how in the world do you deal with somebody like that? How traditional are they, and are their traditions similar to yours? Some people have said, well, all American Indians want to be traditional. You know, they said this in their posting, and I was thinking, no, not really. You've got to understand who you're dealing with and what they want, what their expectations are. Go away. Just go away. There we go. Okay. But primarily what you need to do is you need to attend to your client. You need to show them that you care about what they have to say. And one way to do that is to lean forward, to sit in an open and accessible way and your face must express appropriate concern about what's going on. And of course, that's what I tried to do with the young lady that was had the father fixation situation, who was flirting with me. And of course, I tried this in the beginning, and she assumed that meant that I was open to whatever it was that she wanted to fling at me. And the reality was I wasn't open for that at all. Wow. That was interesting. Okay, facial expressions are extremely important. Facial expressions should be congruent to what the client is relating and experiencing. So if they're sad, then you shouldn't be smiling, because then they think you're smirking at them, and we certainly don't want to smirk. For most people, this comes naturally, but some are taught to smile or laugh at adversity. This is the way we dealt with things when I was working in the hospital, was by laughing all the horrors off. That's the best way to deal with it. And if you can smile and laugh in the face of death, somebody else's death, of course, not your own. If you can do that, then probably you can get through with very little trauma. And it works. I mean, it really does work. If you are creating conflicting emotions when you're dealing with something like that, then you're more likely to be able to handle it. You can, if you put a facial expression on your face, your body will react to that facial expression. So if you smile when you're really feeling sad, then the sadness won't be as extreme. Does that all that make sense? We can fool our own bodies, as confusing as that is. Okay, thank you. And we do that. We can do that. And that's one of the reasons why medical personnel are such goofballs sometimes, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to control their own emotions. And control their reaction to some of the things that they see. It's not natural to see somebody without a hand, with a hand over in a pile of ice sitting over there. That was a bit of a shock. I hadn't seen the guy. They called me into the emergency room, and I went into the emergency room. And so I'm setting all up so I could draw the guy's blood, and I put it down right beside this basin full of ice, and I look over at the basin, and here's a hand sitting there. The guy had chopped his hand off, and they had put it on ice. I hadn't even looked at the guy yet in here. And he was making jokes back there. It was really kind of interesting. He was dealing with his severed hand fairly well. His hand was sitting there, and while I was watching it, it kind of flexed. You know, just really, and you know how these things work. Okay, well, it's kind of spooky. It was kind of like Halloween, except it was like March or something. Anyway, he chopped it off in an industrial accident. He'd gotten his hand chopped off. They reattached it, so that was kind of exciting. I know. It didn't work very well, but they reattached it. Maintaining regular eye contact is another way that you can show that you are paying attention. People from Asia and those from Northern Europe, that's Sweden, Norway, the Lutheran Germans, if you know anything about Germany. All the blonde-headed people, they don't like direct eye contact. They don't really handle direct eye contact very well. These individuals tend to prefer a more peripheral gaze, finding the direct stare too intense. So if you're dealing with, this is weird because I was stationed in Germany, and I was in central Germany, and in southern Germany all the people have black hair and they're relatively short, but in northern Germany they're all blonde and blue-eyed and tall. They're tall and slender. It's really kind of interesting. But we were right in between where the two met, I guess. It was really kind of weird. If you were talking to somebody that was blonde and blue-eyed, it was hard to get them to smile, but the people from the south, you know, they like to drink their beer. That's where Munich is, down south. That's the Catholic section of Germany. And they're just a little bit less severe. It's also warmer down there, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it. It's really kind of interesting. They're shorter and squatter, and they have darker hair. Northern Germans are sparse and slender and blonde-headed and blue-eyed, and Lutheran, so it's really kind of bizarre. Every town in Germany, I think I told you guys this, every town in Germany has two churches. They're financed by the state. One's Lutheran and the other's Catholic. And they're usually on opposite ends of Main Street. So you'll have one on one end of town, one on the other end of town. And if you're Lutheran, you live on that end. If you're Catholic, you live on the other end. It's really kind of strange. I know, they just kind of separate there. There's nothing in the middle of town usually, unless it was there before and wasn't destroyed during the war. Why are we talking about this? Oh, we're talking about people from Northern Europe. Okay. And I have no idea who Emma Stone is or where she's from. I don't know. Even she may not even be German. So, but she does have big eyes. Any distracting behavior, including taking notes, should be avoided as it distracts from the process. And this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't be taking notes while your clients are while you're talking to your clients. It's very distracting for them. It stops the process. So if you're getting good information from them, and of course you want to write things down. If it's really good information, you're going to remember it anyway. So don't worry about taking notes. But if you take notes, you need to be aware that you're potentially stopping the process, and you're going to have to start it up again as soon as your note taking is over with. Freudians, I don't know if you've ever seen television shows or movies with Freudians, but they're taking notes constantly, of course, but their clients can't see them. Their clients are behind them, or they are behind their clients, so their clients can't see them taking notes. But most psychologists don't do that. They don't take notes while they're counseling. If you've ever watched this on television and somebody starts taking notes, they say, "Well, what did I say? What did I say? What did I do?" You know, it's one of those kinds of things. So one of the things that happens is that you are stopping the process, and it's something that you need to remember if you decide that you need to write something down. They may see fidgety movements on your part as disinterest, as impatience, or as boredom. And as you can see, this lady's bored almost to tears. I'm so happy that nobody's out there with a facial expression like this or like this. Nobody's taking a nap, which is kind of nice. Thank you. I appreciate everybody attending to what I'm saying. There you go. That's how happy I am, just like you. Another way to communicate involvement is through minimal encouragement. This happens to me on the telephone. I'll be listening to somebody and I won't say anything. They'll wonder if they have lost their connection. This is very common, especially around here where connections are not that certain, I guess. You never know if you've got connections or not. So sometimes they'll ask me if I'm still there, or I'll ask them if they're still there. You know, I'll say something controversial or something. This happens to me and my wife from time to time. She doesn't get very good cell reception, and I certainly don't get very good cell reception here. So sometimes we lose connection, or she's in the car. We've got Bluetooth in our car. There's something wrong with it. I don't know. It sounds, everything that she says sounds like it has an S at the end. She sounds like a snake. Everything sounds like with S's in it. It's just so weird, and some of the time I can't really understand what she's saying. As confusing as that is. Anyway, okay, so we need minimal encouragement. You can nod your head, which is a good way to do it if you can see the person. You can repeat one or two words that they have said. This is very Rogerian. This is how Rogers does it. He nods his head a lot, and he says, yeah. Or you can say, is another way to do it. Or just nod your head like the guy with the blue sunglasses is doing. It's confusing as there we go. Pee Wee Herman, one of my favorites. One of everybody's favorites. Everybody loves Pee Wee. Or not. Listening involves fully focusing on what the other person is trying to communicate. Listening actually goes beyond attending. Most of us are composing. Of course, we talked about this before. Usually when you're listening to somebody, you're composing what you're going to say to them next. So you're not really listening to what they're saying. You're thinking about what brilliant thing you're going to say. One of the reasons I very rarely say anything brilliant is because I actually listen to people when they talk to me. I'm not trying to compose something brilliant in my mind. I've been trained to do this, so I do it. And so sometimes they're looking for advice, and I haven't even thought about what I'm going to say next. So I say something stupid. Usually I say something stupid. I'm really good at that. I've been practicing all my life. Just ask my wife. Listening isn't just hearing the words, but conveying the understanding of the implications of what the client is saying. And this is the most important thing as far as Rogerian therapy is concerned. as far as the social work the way that social workers will counsel is the idea that you're showing them that you understand what they're talking about. And you do this in the fewest amount of words possible. So a lot of times you'll repeat something that they have said, or you'll repeat it to them as a question, trying to get deeper into that topic. While listening, the practitioner uses minimal encouragement to get the client to continue disclosing, and of course he's nodding his head. I can't remember what the other guy was doing. Pee-wee's doing nothing. This guy's nodding his head as well, showing that he understands and keep going, you know, and that's really all that facial expression is telling us. Okay, keep going, keep going. Listening involves noticing the client's communication style, including their tone, their volume, the speed of delivery, noticing pauses, silence. Silence is important. Are they thinking? Are they reflecting? Changes in patterns of speech, of course. All of these things you need to note. You need to be aware of. They can indicate sadness. They can indicate a change. They can indicate the fact that they haven't been thinking about a select thing, and now all of a sudden they have a revelation. So all of these things are extremely important. Now, when I talk about reading people, this is really what I'm talking about. Now, when we're listening to what they're saying, you're listening to all of these things and all of the changes that take place. So when you read people, you're not only reading their facial expressions, you're not only reading their body language, but you're also taking in all of this at the same time. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about reading people. Some people do it, some people don't. Somebody who has not been trained as a Rogerian counselor, a lot of times they won't take any of this in. They won't see the same things that Rogerians do. I'm not saying Rogerians are superior to other counselors. All I am saying is if you're trained to do this, it's a lot easier because you're listening for changes. Thank you so much. You're listening to changes. Okay. Does all that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? We've got to read people. We've got to be aware of everything that's going on, the way they're sitting, the way that their facial expressions, the changes in their facial expressions, the change in any verbal information that they're giving you. A lot of times it's the first words that they say that are the most important because that will tell you whether they're trying to control their emotions or not control their emotions. It's really hard to, what is their volume when they first start speaking? If it's a little bit too loud, it means that they're trying to control their emotions, that something is going on in there that they're trying to hide from you because they're trying to control their modulation. Okay. All of this stuff will give you information. I have had conversations with select individuals, and they were fairly nebulous conversations that didn't have anything to do with anything, but the conversation started off too loud, or the conversation started off too quiet. What's going on here? And as it turned out, we were talking about something that wasn't really important, but something very important was taking place in their life. But of course, they didn't want to talk to me about it, but I recognized the fact that something was going on. And usually it was, there was something going on at home, something like that. I used to have a conversation. I had a friend when I was teaching at Mississippi University for Women, and she was having trouble with her husband. And it was kind of weird because every time I would start a conversation with her, no matter what it was about, usually it was about Gen Psych or developmental psychology. Whenever I started a conversation with her, it would sound like she was about to break into tears, and this is weird. Why are you crying about, sensation and perception? I don't understand. Why is this upsetting you? I don't get it. And then and whenever she talked about her husband, she was very effusive about what a wonderful person he was, and he'd always been this wonderful person. As it turned out, the two of them weren't doing very well. They weren't doing very well. very well because he was a minister's child. He was a Lutheran minister's child. I'm sorry, Presbyterian minister's child. And he had been taught not to show emotion. So she wanted him to show more emotion. And this became an issue with the two of them. She was small, she was a little bitty thing, and he was huge. He was like, 6'5" and 250 pounds. He was just a massive fellow. And she was a tiny little thing. So she felt intimidated by him. And the reason that she had started dating him was because he was nice, and also because he protected her, because she was not very large. Of course, that's not a reason to start a relationship. Everything's a reason to start a relationship. But eventually, of course, she divorced the guy and married somebody else. And of course, she's projecting this, oh, we're so happy, we're so happy, we're so happy. But every time she started a conversation, no matter what the conversation was, it sounded like she was about to break into tears. And I mentioned this to her a couple times, and of course she was a cognitive psychologist. And it was really interesting because she was in denial. She didn't, no, that's not right, that's not real, that can't possibly be true. The other thing was, I was afraid she had fallen in love with me. This happens to me all. Okay, that's not what happened. But anyway, eventually she, of course, divorced the guy. She divorced the guy. It wasn't my idea. I mean, I just told her, it sounds to me like you've got a problem. Maybe you need to talk to somebody about it. Not me, please, not me, because I used to think that you were in love with me, so this wouldn't work at all. But eventually, of course, she did talk to somebody about it. She she's a psychologist. Psychologists they're like doctors. A doctor's sick. A doctor's got a problem, and he's in denial. He doesn't want to handle it. Well, she was a psychologist. She had exactly the same problem. Anyway, eventually everything turned out okay. And now she writes me she lives in Dalton, Georgia. Dalton, Georgia. She writes me from Dalton, Georgia. She sends me these wonderful letters because she thinks that I had something to do with her divorce. I had nothing to do with her divorce. I just noticed that she was having a problem. Nobody else gave a flying rat's ass. Can I say that? Okay. And of course, she's projecting how wonderful her husband is and how perfect everything was. Well, he was as miserable as she was because he didn't have the capability of showing emotions or something. Because all of his life as a preacher's kid, he'd had to arrest that whole aspect of his life. Communication styles vary by culture between families. Some communication styles are direct, not very many. It happens, sometimes it happens, but sometimes it doesn't. This lady was from Iowa, and talking about your feelings wasn't something that happened. It was very common. I mean, she felt like she was just like the other guy, the preacher's kid, because she didn't talk about her emotions ever at all, ever. No direct communication styles where she was concerned. If she found a problem, she would tell you what was going on. She had that kind of a direct style, but if she was dealing with her own self, with her own emotions, her communication style was not direct at all. Some people have a clear communication style, an easy to understand communication style. Some use jargon or colloquialisms. Some professors do this. I try to stay away from jargon and colloquialisms. I try to do that, but some people, they think it shows their intelligence, so they drop all these words that nobody understands. If I don't understand what the word is, I'm not going to use it on you guys, that's for sure. You guys know what colloquialism. I just realized there's a long word for you. Everybody understands colloquialism. Narrative style. The first time I had, let's see, how can I explain this? I used to sweat when I was up in Montana, and the guy that ran the sweat was a healer. Their style of healer isn't the same as your style of healer, so I don't want you to think that this guy's doing sand paintings and whatnot, or whatever. No, but the first time I went over to talk to this guy, he told me a story, and of course he speaks in a cyclical manner, he told that story 4 times. I guess he thought I was stupid because I didn't get it the first time, and I didn't get it the second time, so he told it to me the 3rd and 4th time. Anyway, that was his narrative style. That's, he told you something over and over and over again. That was his narrative style. Confused in a circular manner, and that's what I was just talking about with Sonny. Jump from one topic to another. Some people do this. I had a friend that used to come down to talk he wanted to eat supper with us because he liked the way my mother cooked. Of course, there were 6 kids in my family. I know, there were 6 kids in my family, and he wanted to, a plate at the table. Well, the table was barely big enough for the 8 of us. We weren't very large people, obviously, but he always wanted to come down and talk to us. Mainly because at his house, their communication style was by yelling. So nobody heard anything unless it was at the highest volume possible. So there were 3 kids in the family, and they'd be yelling back and forth, and the mom would be yelling at the dad, and the dad would be yelling at the kid, and that was their communication style. But in my family, we didn't do that. We were far quieter than that. But it was really kind of interesting when he first started coming down and eating dinner with us. If he would interrupt people, and of course that didn't happen at our table. That wasn't something that we did, but in his house, if you wanted somebody to hear what you had to say, you interrupted them, and you spoke louder than they did. So he tried that in our house, and it really didn't work at all because that wasn't the way that we did things. He wanted to change the topic, so he would just blurt out that that's stupid. Let's talk about this. One of those kind of deals. And of course, it didn't work at our table. There were so many people there anyway. My goodness gracious. Anyway, in his house, they jumped from topic to topic. It was their normal means of communication plus yelling. The interesting thing is that he eventually became a nurse, and his brother became a judge. Became a judge. And nurses have to stay quiet almost all the time, which was what poor Noel had to do. And his brother, of course, was a judge, so he was used to yelling over people, or he yelled over people a lot. And as the judge, of course, all he had to do was bang his gavel a couple times and everybody shut up. And he liked that. He really liked that a lot. They do not complete their thoughts. That happens all the time. It seems to happen to me all the time. I'm telling you guys something, I can't remember what the punchline was. So I apologize for that. That's my communication style. Communication can only take place if you allow the client proper time to express their thoughts and their feelings. And this is tough. This is tough. I had a Fulbright Hayes Scholarship, and we went down to Peru and Guatemala. I told you the stories from time to time. My roommate was a professor of American Indian Studies. He was a Jewish guy from New York City. but he was a professor of American Indian Studies, which I found just fascinating. Why in the world did you ever study American Indians if you live in New York City? My God, you never saw one until you were an adult. Why in the world would you ever study American Indians? Well, anyway, he did. And he came out here, and he was on this reservation, and he was talking to an elder, and he would ask the guy a question, and the guy would sit there for 2 or 3 minutes. And of course, he's from New York City, and in New York City, there's noise all the time. You fill the air with words. If you don't have anything to say, you just blab anyway. So that was his narrative style. So this guy would wait for a couple minutes, and then he would talk. And Jeff put up with this for a couple narratives, for a couple times, and then then he started interrupting the guy, and he never got his answer. So eventually, Jeff asked, "Well, why do you wait for such a long time before you give me an answer?" And he said, "Well, Jeff, your questions are such good questions. I want to give you the best answer I possibly can. So after that, Jeff didn't interrupt the guy. He didn't try to fill it in. He allowed silence, which was not something that he was used to. He used to tell that story in his class. It's really kind of an interesting fellow. Jewish guy from New York City who teaches American Indian Studies. I found that just fascinating. He taught at the University of Billings, at MSU Billings. At MSU Havre, and it's northern, MSU Northern. The guy that taught American Indian Studies was from Finland. Don't you find that curious that this guy from Finland was teaching American Indian Studies? You don't find that strange at all? The fact that Havre is in between two Indian reservations. It's in between Rocky Boy and Fort Belknap. It's right in between, and here they have a guy from Finland teaching American Indian Studies. You don't find that the dumbest thing in the world? And they could find all kinds of scholars on the Fort Belknap reservation or on the Rocky Boy reservation. But no, they go all the way to Finland to find somebody to teach American Indian Studies.
When my granddaughter was dancing, hoop dance, and we were doing a lot of powwows, and we would camp out. That was our fun weekends. And we met a lot of people from different countries.
Right.
And they're very, very curious about
sure.
the Native Americans in this country.
Sure.
And we met a particular German family. He was a big, I don't know, some kind of colonel in the German Air Force.
Right.
And they spent a lot of time out here with us. In fact, one of their sons, while they made a trip to Germany, stayed with us for almost 2 months. And he absolutely loved it.
Well,
and wanted to come back
there's
and
a,
go to
there's
school
a
out
reason,
here.
There's a reason why the Germans are so enamored with American Indians. Back at the turn of the 20th century, this guy wrote novels about. Of course, the novels are so grotesquely inaccurate, but they fell in love with the idea of American Indians and white people being adopted into tribes, because that was the whole gist of these stories, these Shatterhand stories. So we would, when we were in Germany, we were there for 3 years. When we were in Germany, we used to go to different places, and they would be having powwows, what they referred to as powwows. Of course, they weren't anywhere close to being accurate, but I mean, it was like cinematic. Anyway, that's why they're so enamored with American Indians. Yeah, I know you can sell all kinds of stuff to them if you want. The Germans, they're crazy. They'll have a gathering in the summertime, and there will be tens of thousands of people in these gatherings, and they're all dressed up like Indians, and they've got on black wigs. If they have blonde hair, they have black wigs on. They have buckskin. And, everybody's got all these original or theoretically original stuff, and you're looking at it and going, oh my God, it's not an eagle feather. That looks like an eagle feather, but that ain't an eagle feather. What you doing? You can't have an eagle feather anyway. I guess
There was a family in Many Farms, and all of their kids were dancers, and they had one son who was an awesome hook dancer, and they would fly them over for their activities.
Oh, sure.
At least once a year for several years.
Yeah.
Of course, they're all grown and they got kids of their own now. So.
Well, I mean, and they really enjoy it. They think they're being authentic, and you can look at it any way you want. But I mean, they feel like it's authentic. But the reality is, it's all relatively superficial, and most of their information comes from these crazy novels that this guy wrote. Anyway, if we look at some of the paintings that were done of American Indians in the 1830s, most of them were done by Europeans coming over here, Germans especially, coming over to the United States and wandering throughout the West, looking at different tribes and painting pictures, and some of these are the only accurate pictures of the past of American Indians that we have. as horrible as that is. I know, there's nobody else taking pit, well, of course, maybe Koyar at the time. It was really kind of fascinating. Anyway, the guy from Finland was the professor of American Indian Studies. I just found that crazy. He was fairly knowledgeable, just like Jeff was. Jeff was very, very knowledgeable. Had studied all the different tribes and whatnot. And he lived in Montana, so, and he did his research down here on the Navajo Reservation, which was kind of interesting. Silence, okay, so silence, all of these stories have to do with silence. You know, the whole story about Jeff not wanting to allow this man to think has to do with silence. Silence is good. It's good for the client. It allows them to garner their thoughts, to collect their thoughts. And this is a good thing. They need to think. Some people, if you're a police officer, silence means they're trying to create a story that's untrue. They're trying to perpetrate a lie. But the reality is that some people just need to think. They need to try to determine what good piece of information they're going to give you next, or whether they're going to give you this piece of information. I was counseling an individual one time, and we'd been going just great guns for about 40, 45 minutes. This is right before the end, and all of a sudden she shut up. And it was one of those, uh-oh, what's going to happen next? Did I say something? Usually that's your thought. Did I say something and now I've insulted them and they don't want to talk? But what she was trying to do, she was trying to decide whether to tell me that she'd been molested by her brother at some point. She'd been hiding this piece of information. She hadn't talked about this at all. We had been off in, another way off in another topic area, and she hadn't talked about this at all. And she was trying to decide whether she was going to tell me this or not. I know that now because, of course, she eventually did tell me. But the first time she tried to tell me, she had these moments of silence, and of course I filled it up. I filled it up with words. And so about a month later, finally, she did it. The same thing happened again. And this time, I got just a little bit of intelligence, and I shut up for the 2 minutes that it took her to decide that she was going to tell me about this. And of course, she had, as it turned out, she had been molested by him not once, but by multiple times. And her idea was that she was trying to protect her younger sisters by allowing him to molest her. And it was really kind of a shocking thing, because you can't tell by looking at somebody if they've been molested by their brother. Anyway, it was really kind of fascinating. And all I needed to do was shut up, and she was going to give me that information. And eventually, she needed to tell me that information because I was her counselor. And we couldn't go, I couldn't help her unless I had this piece of information. We couldn't go anyplace else. We were stuck. We were just going over the same old information over and over and over again. And she needed to delve in a new direction. Yes, ma'am.
Is sibling molestation, as we would call it, acceptable among tribes in general, or particular tribes?
I'm sorry?
Is sibling molestation
Okay. Is it acceptable?
acceptable among tribes, or tribes in particular?
No. No. It's considered incest, and incest is
Yeah.
it's a universal taboo. There are select groups that do practice it, but not here that I'm aware of. I don't know of any group in the United States that's acceptable practice. It's maybe common practice, but it's not acceptable practice.
Okay.
The royal families of Egypt, for example, used to practice it. There are groups down in South America that's relatively common. and acceptable behavior, but no place in the United States that I know. And yeah, of course, the biggest problem, my problem was that I was uncomfortable with silence. I was worried that it was a problem that I had, not a problem that she had, not a problem that she was trying to voice. So silence can be a positive thing, and is usually a positive thing. You need to let your client think. And if you're one of those people that think that they're trying to come up with a really good lie, then you've been watching too many police dramas or something. Even when practitioners are fully focused on listening, they may misinterpret the client's words. Client may use emotional words differently because of their cultural or familial imperatives. Okay, at this stage, I'm not going to turn it off anyway. We need to talk about swearing because sometimes that's the only way to get these ideas out. If you're one of those individuals that won't stand for somebody using the F-bomb or using an S word or an M word, I don't know. Anyway, it all depends on who the individual is and the language that they use. You've got to allow them to express themselves in the manner that they are accustomed. If it offends you that people swear, then you need to listen to more rap music. Just kidding. Sometimes this is the only way, because it causes anger, and this is a way to express anger. And they need to show you how angry they are. So they need to use these words in order to display their anger. Sometimes they will swear in order to drive you away, push you away. But if you don't allow them to do that, in other words, if you accept anything that they say, then it's not going to drive you away. And they're not going to use words in that manner. They will only do that if they see that it upsets you. Remember, these guys really don't want to give you all the information that they need to give you. It's painful for them. So a lot of times, the farther away they can drive you, the less they're going to have to, information they're going to have to give you. Okay? Okay. I apologize for that, but when we're talking about swearing, you know, this is a real emotional topic for a lot of individuals. Some people just will not tolerate, you know, this type of language. But the reality is that sometimes that's the only way to express these horrible, horrible emotions that they've experienced. And it's what's going on in their mind, and that's what you need. You need the words, you need to understand the intensity of their emotions. So they need to use these words in order to give you that information. Does that make sense? Okay. Sorry. Is it cultural or familial? Well, potentially it is. It probably has more to do with being on the street. It's probably doesn't, and I guess you could call that a subculture. I mean, if somebody was molested by an uncle, and it really, well, of course it really upset them. What kind of words are they going to use? I mean, they will probably swear. And they'll probably use the nastiest words they can come up with, because that's the emotion that has been raised in them. And if you won't allow them to give you that information in the manner that they have to give it to you, because that's the only way that they can impart that the intensity of their pain, then they can't tell you how much pain they're in. Does that make sense? Okay. You guys accept all that? All right. I know it's hard. It's very difficult. But it's the only way we can get the information that we need. Interpretation must be explained by the client, and of course they're the ones that have to tell you why they use whatever words that they used to express themselves. When the client says, what the client says affects the practitioner, and this is what I was just talking about. If they're using words that you find offensive, and you don't want to hear them anymore, and you tell them, we don't use those kinds of words in my office, all of a sudden, you know, you've just created a door. You've just created a barrier between you and your client. You've got to allow them to express themselves in whatever language they use. It's important for practitioners to listen to their own responses as a way of further understanding what the client is saying. You will respond, and sometimes you'll respond with anger, and it will be a reflexive anger. And you need to understand that this has created something in you. Your job is to interpret what's going on with them and help them. Your job is not your job is not to fix yourself or to help yourself. Okay. So you need to realize what's going on within you at the same time. If you hear a horrible, horrible story about being molested as a child, and this really upsets you a lot, then potentially you will use verbiage. You'll use words that express that. You will show anger to your client. Well, of course, they may misinterpret that, so you need to be very, very careful. You need to understand what you're thinking. And this is one of the reasons why, and we've talked about this before, if you've got a problem, you need to deal with your problem. You shouldn't use your clients to deal with your own problems. If you've got a problem with anything, then you need to understand what it is, and you need to deal with it before you get into counseling. Otherwise, you're going to be continually dealing with your own problem rather than your client's problem. Okay? These are all very upsetting things. They can tell you some god-awful stories. And the stories will make you emotional, make you feel things. But you need to be dealing with their problem, not with your problem. Okay? If a client is speaking in a monotone about something very sad and the practitioner does not experience any personal response to this, it is important to determine whether the client is allowing himself or herself to feel the feelings or the practitioner is detached. Now remember, they've been dealing with this problem for an extended length of time. So they may not speak in an emotional manner. They may talk about watching somebody die and in a monotone, and you're going, wow. Why aren't you more upset about this? They've actually written novels about this, about things like this, where somebody is able to deal with something in a very mature manner, and people around them are going, oh my God, your mother just died. Why aren't you more upset? You know, that kind of a thing. You must be a cold-hearted son of a bitch, you know, that kind of thing. And the reality is that they've been dealing with this in their own minds for an extended length of time. I told the story about my mother died. I was there just before she died, and so I'm driving back home. This was 4 years ago. Yeah, it's 4 years ago. She was sick. I mean, she'd been really, really sick for a while. And I had played this scenario over in my mind so many times. Well, my mother's dead. Well, my mother's dead. Well, my mother's dead. You know, she's in really bad shape. I played this over in my mind so many times that when I got the call that she was dead, I didn't have an emotional reaction at all, because I played it over and over and over again in my own mind. And so I reacted not the way most people react when somebody that close to you dies. You know, I had played it over in my mind so many times that I wasn't emotional at all. Okay. Franz Kafka wrote a novel about that very thing, and this guy is convicted of murder because he shows no emotion after he kills this guy. And if he had showed emotion, of course, they would have thrown him in prison for 15 or 20 years. But because he showed no emotion, they decided that he was a cold-blooded murderer. And so they executed him instead. Okay? Why am I telling you all these stories? The reason is because I want you to understand that the emotion that you might have because of something may not be the emotion that they show. It may be a cultural imperative that they don't show emotions. At my father's funeral, my mother told everybody that was there, anybody cries, I don't want to hear it. She didn't want anybody crying, and nobody cried except my brother-in-law cried. He was the only one that cried. So my sister didn't cry, none of my brothers cried, I didn't cry, my mother certainly didn't cry. But she told everybody, I don't want to hear it. That's, he was old and he was tired and he needed to die. And so we should all be happy that he's now no longer in pain. That was her point. She's a nurse, so she's dealt with this stuff a lot. Okay? So the emotions that you think people should have may not be the emotions that they're actually displaying. Okay? And you need to note what those emotions are, what emotions they're actually displaying. Not the ones you want them to display, but the ones that they're actually displaying. Okay. And you need to determine if that's a cultural imperative or not. Okay. Okay, let's express warmth. Now that we've talked about emotions, let's express warmth. Warmth is expressed through demeanor, through your showing concern for the select individual, through acceptance of everything that they say. The first time you reject them or you tell them, I don't want to hear you use those words in my office. First time you say that, you've showed them that you don't accept them for who they are. The tone of voice that you use, your posture, you're listening, the fact that you're listening carefully. As you can see, these two people are obviously in love, and he's showing her a lot of warmth. Touch can be a way of expressing warmth when it's appropriate, and you need to determine when it's appropriate. Who was I talking? Oh, Jerry, Sarah's husband. Jerry and I have talked to each other maybe 3 times, but we are both military veterans, and because of that, there's this interesting connection between the two of us. Anyway, I saw him the other day, and I'm a toucher. I touch people. It's not like I'm fondling anybody, but I like to touch people. Anyway, so I usually pat somebody on the back or pat somebody on the shoulder, and it was kind of interesting because, Jerry's not a toucher, but the other day I passed him in the hall. I said, Jerry, how you doing? He said, I'm doing great. How are you? It's one of those kind of deals. And we both smacked each other on the back. It was really kind of interesting. He's never done that before, but because I'm a toucher, he decided he had to touch me back. Okay, so so touching can be appropriate. If you've ever watched a football game, football players smack each other on the butt, which seems a little odd, unless you play football, and it's a very emotional game, and that's how you show pleasure. Anyway, so touching, you have to decide whether you can touch or not. Some places people are touchers. Up on the Fort Belknap Reservation, they're huggers. They hug a lot. There's a lot of hugging taking place. Okay, and a lot of laughing. They laugh about like everything. I know, it's kind of bizarre. Anyway, a lot of hugging. The appropriate expression of warmth can depend on many diversity issues. Gender influences how warmth is expressed, particularly is influenced by various religious and spiritual beliefs. Do you touch? Do you not touch? How do you show warmth? I was not raised, I've told you guys this, I was not raised in the church. So I started working in the hospital, and I started working in a Catholic hospital actually. And it's really kind of interesting because I had to deal with a lot of death. I worked in the morgue, and sometimes I was invited to funerals. I don't know, it's something that you do in Omaha, I guess. You're invited to funerals. It's really kind of interesting because, and I don't know if anybody's Catholic, but in the Catholic Church, everybody's got a job to do at a funeral. It's really fascinating. Aunt somebody is the one that cooks all the food. She gets all of her sisters together, and they cook the food. The grieving widow, if it's a widow or a widower, they don't have to do anything at all. They just have to show up and wear the appropriate clothing. If they have children, then they have select jobs that they have to do. Somebody has to arrange for the plot of land where they're going to be buried. Somebody buys the casket. Everybody's got a job to do. It's really kind of cool because everybody's got a job to do. So, but if you watch other religions, like Methodists, for example, you know, they're just all scattered all over the place. Nobody knows what to do. They still don't have a casket. Nobody's bought a casket. Everybody's crying. You know, it's really kind of bizarre. Catholics, everybody's got a job to do. It's kind of cool. Why am I mentioning this? I don't know, because everybody's different. The whole point is it has to do with religion and spiritual beliefs. It's not like people aren't unhappy. On the Fort Belknap Reservation, if somebody dies, they hold a wake. It lasts for 3 days. If he's a veteran, then somebody has to stay with the body all the time. A veteran has to be with the body all the time. Really kind of interesting. But they hold a wake, and everybody is there, and they come around and they tell funny stories about the person. There's lots of food. Anyway, and they have a wake, and of course you guys do it very much differently than that, but that's the way they do it. You know, they hold a wake. So the strange thing is that if somebody in your family dies, then you have to take 3 or 4 days off in order to go to the funeral, because it won't take that long. They will hold the wake for 3 days, and then they will bury the person, and after that, you know, you have to go back. You can't grieve for a week. You know, there's no grieving period that takes place. The grieving is private, but the funeral itself is very public. It's a very public situation. Racial and ethnic differences in cultural norms influence the expression of warmth. How much warmth do we show? We're talking about warmth, not death here. Power differential between different people can confuse how expressions of warmth are interpreted between a child and an adult, a doctor and a patient, or a person with perceived economic power with one who does not have the same power. And of course, this is what we're seeing in the current president. This president has always been wealthy. So he expresses his power, and he expresses himself completely differently than anybody we've ever seen before, but any president we've ever seen. We've never had a president with this kind of money before. You know, the Bushes had money, but not that much money. They had not grown up in poverty, certainly didn't grow up in poverty, but they didn't display their wealth like this president does. This president's a billionaire. He claims to have $7 billion. I have no idea how much money he has. But he's always been wealthy, so he's always had this innate power that his money showed. And he's not used to people disagreeing with him, because when you've got that kind of money, everybody says yes. Not just sometimes, but all the time. And he's really not used to this. And we keep seeing conflicts taking place because of him trying to display his power that we have never seen before. That we have never seen anybody with this kind of money as the President of the United States. And he's doing really odd things. He went to the UN and called the North Korean whoever Un is, he kept calling him Rocket Man. I know. It's just too bizarre. I mean, nobody does that. Nobody's ever done that before. You don't see a Merkel, you know, go to the UN and talk about Trump and call him, I don't know, that jackass in the White House or whatever. You know, we never see this. They use diplomacy. He doesn't understand diplomacy because of his power. So, you know, this is something that we've never seen before. It's really kind of fascinating for me. If he doesn't start World War III, it's going to be very fascinating, but we'll see what happens. He keeps threatening the North Korean government. It's really just too bizarre for me. We don't do that kind of stuff, you know. We use diplomacy, and he doesn't use diplomacy at all. Expressions must be genuine due to the way that the brain functions in thousands of years of history. Individuals are quickly able to pick up warmth that is not genuine. We have learned to do this. And if you want, a good way to think about this is if you've ever been to a bar and somebody tried to pick you up. It's never happened to me before, but I'm sure it's happened to other people. People get picked up in bars all the time. My son was a bartender, and women used to flirt with him all the time. And he's like, everything went right over his head. You know, it's like, he has Asperger's syndrome where women are concerned or something. Anyway, so it's the same deal, you know, guys buy you drinks or whatever, or young ladies buy you drinks, or give you their telephone number. I guess that's what happened with my son. I told you, but I was cleaning out his house. He was in a academic program, so he didn't have a chance to unpack any of his stuff. So I went out and to help him unpack some of his stuff and clean up his house. It was a mess. You wouldn't believe it. He had a barrier between the doorway and his bed, so he had to high jump over this massive stuff into his bed every night when he went to bed. It's really stupid. So I just cleaned all that stuff out so he could actually walk into his bedroom. And while I was doing that, I found all these telephone numbers from all these women. You know, Sally, 357, you know, that kind of stuff. And so, and I started stacking these things up because I didn't know why in the world was he keeping them, you know, if he didn't mean to call anybody. So I'm stacking these things up, and the stack got higher and higher and higher and higher. I mean, it was a really big stack of telephone numbers, women's telephone numbers. He never called anybody anyway. He is engaged to the cocktail waitress that he used to work with, so that's kind of interesting. It's important for the practitioner to observe the client's response as a way of judging how warmth was experienced. So as humans, of course, we know whether people are genuine or not. You don't really skip any of this stuff. You really can read people. Are they genuine? Is this real or not? You know. Right?
Mm-hmm.
No? Okay.
My anxious teaches that.
Am I being genuine right now? My poor son. He's such an idiot. Turns out the guy's, his brain is structured mathematically or something. I don't know. So he thinks in numbers. He just drives me crazy because I'll say, well, you know, you need to buy a new car. And he'll say, well, I can't afford a new car. And he's worked out his whole finances, you know. Well, I've got all this money here, and I've got this money here, and if I make this much money, if I could go work at the bar for 16 hours, then I'll make this much money, and then I'll, you know, everything's numbers with him. He's just strange. I don't know. And of course, I'm a psychologist, so everything's emotion with me. We don't communicate very well. I talk to him every time I get on the phone with him. It just lasts for hours. We talk for hours, and it's just him explaining all these numbers and whatnot. It's really bizarre. Soccer coach, track man. I don't know. Is he genuine? I don't know if he's genuine or not. The kids love him. These are high school kids. They don't love anybody, so that's kind of it. Okay, anyway. I get lost. I apologize. There we go. Level 1 warmth, the practitioner communicated little or no concern for the client and appeared cold, detached, stiff, and mechanical, like him. There you go. Not showing a whole lot of warmth there. Okay, that's level 1. You may find this really odd because there's no level 2 and no level 4, but there's a level 3. At least half the time, the practitioner verbally and non-verbally communicated concern and caring appropriate to the unique needs of the client. There you go. He's showing some kind of concern there. And level 5, the practitioner's facial expression and posture consistently communicated concern and caring appropriate to the unique needs of the client. And this is, see, he's showing concern. Okay, it's level 5. Okay. So where's level 4? Well, level 4 is just a number, and so is level 3. So if it's somewhere in between 1 and 2, or 1 and 3, it's 2. But they don't have 5 explanations. Okay, end of chapter 6. Chapter 7 has to do with actually doing the counseling. So we're going to start talking about how to confront somebody as far as counseling is concerned, how to meet somebody, that's what the next chapter is about, and how to end the session. Why in the world are we talking about ending the session before we talk about even having the session? Because the ending the session is as important as starting the session. Oh, I know, that's kind of strange. So this is chapter 7. So we will start counseling very soon. Those of you who haven't finished your histories, you haven't come up with a problem, you need to do that because we need to start practicing. And besides, I don't have enough material to fill up the whole semester anyway. You saw the book's only about this big. It's only about that thick. I don't have enough material. So you guys are going to have to start counseling probably the second week in October. Okay? So try to get your stuff in as soon as possible, but if you don't have a character, you really can't. Nobody can counsel you because you won't have a character to counsel. So you need to do this. We'll probably start after this chapter, maybe after the next chapter. So you need to get your histories in. And I give you points for it, so that's important.
That's just nice.
Does anybody have any questions about what I'm expecting? Certainly not a problem that you actually have or have had in the past. I don't want to deal with people having nervous breakdowns in the class. That's not ethical. Okay. So it has to be something that you have very little experience with. And that's why I want you to write the paper on your problem, on this problem that you have no history with, okay? So that you understand how to act.
Do you know that this is on Blackboard?
Yeah.
Information?
Is it?
I tried looking for it.
It's in the-
What did I sent you guys another history, an online history. Do I need to email that? Do I need to re-email that?
Yes, please.
You need it back? Okay. I
Tried
have,
to look for it.
remember I gave you a copy of the history, and it was like 10 pages long. This one's shorter. This one's much shorter, and we can put these online because I not only have you guys, but I also have all of Christopher Jones's people from To the City, who were going to take this class in his class. And of course, since he's not
How
here,
many pages did you want there?
you mean as far as the paper's concerned?
Yeah.
5.
Right.
Five with 5 references. You need to find out how to treat this individual. That's probably not a bad idea as far as finding a reference that works. What time is it? Oh, it's almost time to go. Okay. All right. Okay, so I need you guys to have characters so that we can trade back and forth. One of the other things that's going to happen is you're probably going to be communicating with somebody into the city who is also in this class, who has also created a character anyway. So we have this online and we also have it in the classroom. So that's going to be difficult. I haven't quite figured out how that's going to work yet. Maybe you guys send them a bunch of questions and they answer it. Of course, you can't see their facial expression, but
There's, what is it, 300 or 301 that has the, where you can do ITV.
we need an ITV room for that to work.
Is there anybody using both of them downstairs?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't schedule those things, but scheduling is a problem. Maybe a problem as far as ITV is concerned. And I'm not exactly sure how that would work.
It would be nice if we could borrow those rooms.
Well, actually, in this day and age, there are people that are doing counseling online. And I'm just really curious as to how that works. So we will practice face-to-face, and you will also be doing some counseling online as well. Unfortunately, those guys don't have a choice. They can only counsel online. But we'll try this out, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It worked last year when I did this. And I've actually been doing this for 15 years, the whole counseling thing, and practicing back and forth. And it has worked in other places and here last year. But I don't know about the online thing. This is a first for me, so we'll see how it works.
Are there people that actually practice online
Oh, yeah,
counseling?
and make buku dollars, millions of dollars. Okay, I'll see you guys next time, and we'll tackle chapter 7. Aaron,
Did you just want me to send you? I was trying to make it nice, but the one mistake. Yeah.
well,
That's real
it is now, it's underwater.
That's what I'm saying, like we're in the worst time right now. It's not like I'll be able to like go to Six Flags.
Disneyland, okay. Have fun.
Alright, thanks for.
Backstrip. It's not really underwater, I was just kidding. I don't think I don't think it's open. Disney World is not Disneyland. Disneyland is in Anaheim, California. Oh, Jesus.
Oops.